The self and a social world. This is chapter 5. So let's go ahead and get started. If I can find, where is it? I guess it's two. Oh, there it is. All right. The self and the social world. There's a subtle connection between what is happening in the world around us and what's going on in our heads. Social surroundings tend to affect self awareness. Depending on who we are and where we are, each individual is aware of the differences between themselves and everyone else. Self interest colors social judgment. People tend not to be objective or dispassionate when they are dealing with a situation they are involved in. Self concern motivates social behavior. People do things for their own selves and often function to please or impress society at large. And let me give you an example. Just today, they released a Supreme Court decision that supported the Indian Child Welfare Act. This was an act that was passed in the 1970s trying to keep states from seizing Indian children and fostering them off the reservation. That law was supported today in the Supreme Court by a 7-2 vote. Now, if you think about it, most people in the United States don't care. they, they don't. Somebody in West Virginia, there's no American Indians in West Virginia, so why should they care what's going on with the Indian Child Welfare Act? Or somebody where else do they not have any American Indians? Tennessee or Kentucky. Uh, there are Indians in Iowa, of course, over on the Missouri River. There are Indians. Of course, there are reservations in Wisconsin and Minnesota, and Michigan. All of those states, they care. They really do care. As a matter of fact, it's really kind of interesting because 25 states supported the Indian Child Welfare Act, and it was a couple families and the state of Texas that were trying to overturn this. Now, because you guys are American Indians, and because I interact with American Indians all the time, this is really important to me. And my wife was so giddy. She did a little happy dance when she found out that the conservative court supported the Indian Child Welfare Act. Anyway, but most people in the United States, this doesn't affect them at all. So, that this has to do with your world, our world, and the people around you's world. If you live on the reservation, this was a huge deal. If you live in Los Angeles, probably not so much. Self-awareness is a state of focused attention on the self. Self-awareness is associated with activity in the anterior cingulate cortex, and that is the anterior cingulate cortex right there. Self-awareness develops in humans at about 18 months of age. Some animals, but not many, show self-awareness. Wolves and other pack animals don't seem to have self-awareness. So if you have a dog and your dog likes you and likes you a whole lot, and it doesn't hang around with other dogs, probably what your dog has done is created a concept that you and they that's their pack. It's really kind of interesting the way it works. Lately, my dogs have been ignoring me and running after my wife. As a matter of fact, she's outside and it's hot outside. It's hot and humid, and we have smoke coming down from Canada, so it's real hazy today. So probably they ought to be in the house, but they're not. They're outside with my wife. She's watering her flowers, and they're outside with her. Um, Dogs are pack animals, and so they will create a pack. If there's none around, they will create a pack, and they'll create it with any animal. With a cat, I have cats that the dogs run with. As weird as that sounds, they don't really run very far, but they hang out together, and so the cats are probably considered part of their pack. William James was a psychologist, philosopher, and physician. He taught at Harvard University and was considered one of the most brilliant men of his age. In his Principles of Psychology in 1890, he described the development of the self. Emotional identification with an object makes it part of your self-concept. The self changes over time, and of course, you would have to admit that the person that you were as a junior high student and then the person that you were as a high school student were not exactly the same. Physically, you certainly changed, but also emotionally and mentally, you probably changed. And now that you're out of high school and not caring what your high school friends think, you're different once again. You have changed. You have embraced different ideas of what is important and what is not. George Herbert Mead was a philosopher, sociologist, and psychologist. In The Genesis of Self and Social Control in 1925, Mead wrote that the self emerges through symbolic interaction and internalizes the view of the generalized other. So when you look at somebody else, you may think, oh, geez, all white people are greedy. That's an internalization of a generalization of the other. Because, of course, that couldn't possibly be true. All white people act this way. Well, that can't possibly be true. You know, just like all American Indians are drunks, that's certainly not true. But that's how we internalize things. This creates stereotypes. People can be socialized in multiple cultural frameworks, moving from one place to another, parents from different cultural backgrounds, living in a subculture with different values than the dominant culture. All of these things this is how we are socialized. People with multiple cultural identities engage in cultural frame switching in response to situational cues. And of course, I saw this in the military. My African American friends, when they were interacting in a military framework, then they acted one way. When they were all by themselves, they acted another way. But if they were with most of the people in their unit, which were most of the people in their unit weren't black, they acted another way. And if they were with their black friends, they acted a totally different way. And this is cultural frame switching. Something that you potentially do when you go to Gallup or Flagstaff. When you're around a lot of white people, you probably act a little bit different than you do when you're on the reservation. You probably talk different too. A famous American proverb is the squeaky wheel gets the grease. This means that the more you make yourself known, stand out, or unique, or complain, the more attention you'll get. And of course, the idea is to be unique. Stay squeaky, my friends. Famous Japanese proverb, on the other hand, the nail that stands out gets pounded down. This means that if you are unique or stand out in any way, the culture will force you to conform. Be like everyone else. So in the individualistic United States, the message is to be unique. And in Japan, that is far more collectivistic. If you stand out, then you will be pounded down. You will change. You will be changed. But of course, this isn't always true in the United States. This is just a general concept. If you live on the reservation, for example, potentially people want you to act like everybody else. They want you to be like everybody else. They want you to think like everybody else. Strangely, college is a situation where individuals are given specific answers to specific questions. And usually they only give you one answer. They don't allow you to have more than one answer. But the reality is that life very rarely is black and white. It's normally some shade of gray. So there may be 2 or 3 correct answers. I was talking to a former student of mine. He's looking for a job. He's got a PhD in industrial organizational psychology, and he's looking for a job right now. And he's had 2 job offers. And I keep telling him, it doesn't matter which job you take. It's going to be the right answer because that's the road you're going to take. If you think, oh, I should have taken the other job, as soon as you take one job and then you think that you should have taken the other job, you're not going to be happy with the job that you take. So you've got to be happy with what you do, as long as it's not self-destructive. And of course, taking a job is never self-destructive, or shouldn't be self-destructive. My goodness, I hope work isn't self-destructive. Anyway, so in Japan, you have to be collectivistic and not stick out. And in the United States, uniqueness is embraced. Gender identity, identification of the self as a male or a female. In the North American cultures, women are socialized toward relational self-concepts. Men are socialized toward independent self-concepts. These self-concepts refer to emotional connectedness to others, not the role of self within the group. This is another generality. I was just reading an article today that was talking about using pronouns that are gender neutral. It was an author. What was Le Guin was the lady's name. Ursula Le Guin. She writes fantasy, and she wishes that she had not put any gender identifiers in her writing. But of course, that was 40 years ago that she wrote these books. I have one right here. That's what I was doing. I was getting her book. I've tried to start it a couple times. It doesn't seem that interesting to me. It's a book called The Left Hand of Darkness. And let me see when it was printed. Let's see, 1969. So, yeah, 1969 was a long time ago. And making things gender neutral at that time probably wouldn't have been very acceptable. Age-related stages, unexamined ethnic identity has not thought. So if we're talking about ethnic identity, this is how it usually works. Normally, in the beginning, people don't really think about their ethnic identity very much. They haven't thought about it. It's not part of their self-concept. They may internalize the negative stereotypes, and this I gave you a stereotype just earlier. I hate to use stereotypes, but they may internalize these negative stereotypes, whatever they may be. And of course, if I internalized all white people are greedy, that would be a negative stereotype that I would internalize, and that probably would not make me feel very good. And that's one of the arguments against this whole anti-woke culture thing. The idea that, hey, we did some bad things, but if we tell our kids that we did bad things in the past, they may internalize those stereotypes, the negative stereotypes. Ethnic identity search. So you get as you get older. You may think, oh, I need to understand who I am. I know I'm different, so why not explore it? And that's what happens next. You explore your ethnicity through cultural events, maybe some of the readings that you do. I'm reading a book right now dealing with American Indians in Montana, and one of the students that they're talking about, it's about a high school in the middle of Montana, and they're talking about a student who is a Métis. And if you don't know what Métis is, it's a French word that means half-breed, as weird as that sounds. But there's a whole tribal grouping of people that claim to be Métis, and they're right in the middle of Montana. What happened was these individuals were French traders who had American Indian wives, and their offspring were Métis. They were considered to be not white, but they were considered to be not American Indian either, because they were rejected by for the most part, they were rejected by their tribes. So they banded together, all these French traders and their American Indian wives, whichever tribes you were dealing with, mostly Assiniboine and Cree and Chippewa. Chippewa Cree, who else is up there? They carry the kettle, the Bloods. Anyway, yeah, the Blackfeet, and they banded together and they formed their own grouping that was referred to as the Métis, and they were kind of uh, they formed trading groups with between the white settlers and the American Indians that lived up there. They were referred to as Métis. Why am I talking about this? Oh, because one of the kids has he's a junior in high school, and he's just discovered that that the Métis have a long and storied history in Canada, and he wants to read more about it. So he's exploring. He's exploring this idea that he's exploring his own ethnicity. They may reject anything dealing with the dominant culture, and at this stage he hasn't done that yet. He's just now reading about his Métis ancestry. Achieved ethnic identity. They appreciate their ethnic heritage. They internalize beneficial values while separating self from damaging aspects of group identity. And so they are rejecting the stereotypes. They accept the positive things about their ethnic group, and they're rejecting the negative stereotypes that exist that are probably, for the most part, not true. And that's the way ethnic identity works. You don't know that you've got it, then you start exploring it and try to find out about it, and then you embrace it. Strategic self-presentation is the process of presenting the self in particular ways to shape others' impressions. It requires self-regulation. Failure in self-presentation leads to embarrassment. It can become automatic with practice. And of course, how we present ourselves is really kind of interesting. And usually it's automatic. Well, for me, it's automatic. I don't even remember when it wasn't automatic. I'm so old. But maybe you're a little bit more self-conscious about how you present yourself. Uh, it's an interesting possibility. Common types of self-presentation: ingratiation or flattery is commonly used to gain acceptance in a group. You may compliment the people in the group in order to become part of that group. Modesty increases likability but not perceived competence. If you're modest about who you are and your abilities, that's a good way to get into the group, but they don't recognize your competence. Self-promotion is used when competence is highly valued. So you tell them who you are and where you've been, and how you are would be important to the group. Exemplification: show your integrity and moral worthiness. Intimidation, used for coercion in your self-presentation. Self-handicapping involves placing obstacles in the way of one's own performance in order to protect or enhance the self-concept. When I was growing up, my high school was athletics were really important. And because athletics were so important, other things were not important, like your grades, like how intelligent you were. So a lot of us, especially those of us who were kind of athletic or marginally athletic, we downplayed our intelligence, and we, of course, self-promoted our athletic ability. So we kind of downplayed our intelligence. And I did that for a number of years. And I wish I hadn't. You need to be true to yourself. And if you're intelligent, you're intelligent. Why not promote that? But, it just was not accepted. It was not an acceptable. So there was a form of self-handicapping there. An individual's idea of who they are defines their self-concept. Schemas are mental frameworks that individuals use to organize and categorize the world. Self-schemas are the mental frameworks that we maintain when we think about ourselves. For example, if we see ourselves as athletic, then not only will this be our definition for ourselves, but it will influence what we focus on in ourselves and others. And when I look at myself, of course, since that's the way I was brought up, I look at myself as athletic. I don't see the academic aspect of myself. I'm still lifting weights. I'm still exercising every day, making sure that I maintain myself athletically. But of course, the reality is that you can be scholarly and athletic at the same time, and that's what I learned in college. That just because you're a good athlete doesn't mean that you have to be a dumb athlete, and that kind of helped a lot. I could be as smart as I am, I guess, and project myself in two directions at the same time. You can be athletic and you can be intelligent at the same time. It's not as acceptable, of course. People tend to process information and remember information related to themselves more readily than any other. This is known as self-reference effect. For most people, the most important thing to them is themselves, of course. Research done where individuals were singled out by having them wear clothing that they weren't used to showed they felt as if everyone was watching them, and this is known as the spotlight effect. When you're wearing clothes that you think will make you stand out from everybody else, whether people are paying attention to your clothes or not. An individual's self-schema does not only include who they are, but who and what they would like to be or fear we might become. These are our possible selves. It is this vision of who we would like to be and who we could possibly become that drives us forward or keeps us from getting a butcher knife and chopping up our in-laws. And of course, that's one of the ways that you keep from hurting people, is by saying, if I do this, I'll go to jail. Three aspects of self-concept: actual self, ideal self, and ought self. A discrepancy between actual self and ideal or ought leads to particular emotions. Actual ideal discrepancy leads to dejection related emotions. Actual and ought discrepancy leads to agitation related emotions. Emotional reactions tend to be stronger when related to an important self aspect. So our actual self is who we actually are. The ideal self is who we would like to be. And the odd self is the person that we would be if we were, if we did everything right. And a lot of times the ideal self isn't perfect. The ideal self is rich and they don't care about anybody else and they just wander around whatever. But the odd self is the one that is moral. Has a lot to do with the id and the ego, Freud's id and the ego. The ought is your moral self, and the ideal self is the id, the one that there are no bounds. You can do anything you want. But the actual self is the person that you actually are. An individual's self-esteem is their overall self-evaluation and sense of self-worth. Self-esteem, which is a term that does not exist in China, by the way. The Chinese don't have a concept of self-esteem. They're so collectivistic, they don't think of themselves as individual selves. Self-esteem influences how we approach and respond to life challenges. Self-esteem is the evaluation of one's self-concept. Most people regard themselves more positively than they do their peers, the better than average effect. People with low self-esteem seem to be more adversely affected by negative life events. TV cameraman, I'd want to put my camera down half the time. Anyway, okay. Self-enhancement and self-verification motives. That was one tough lady, wasn't it? Do you understand what happened? I certainly do. I know exactly what happened. This is life in the big city. That's one tough lady. Self-enhancement and self-verification motives conflict in low self-esteem persons. It appears that self-enhancement motive operates in response to a person's feelings, while self-verification operates in response to a person's thoughts. The two motives operate on different time courses. The affective route is quicker, but the cognitive route is more persistent. The two motives serve as checks and balances on each other. Only in cases of maladjustment does one motive strongly dominate the other. Studies suggest that the self-enhancement motive is weaker in collectivist societies than in individualist societies. So this conflict may be an artifact of individualist cultures. There is a dark side to high self-esteem. People with high self-esteem may react with greater aggression than others when someone challenges their favorable self-assessments. And of course, we've seen this with the former president, Donald Trump. He seems to, if somebody says something negative about him, he has to say something negative about that person. He calls them stupid. He calls them nasty. He only calls women nasty. Doesn't call men nasty. He's very abusive. The stability of high self-esteem seems to determine whether threats to self-esteem lead to aggression. Unstable self-esteem may come from conflicts between explicit and implicit self-esteem. High explicit self-esteem and low implicit self-esteem are together associated with narcissism. And so what is narcissism? In Greek mythology, Narcissus fell in love with his own reflection in a pool of water and was so fond of his own image that he couldn't leave, and eventually he died. Today, narcissism refers to the combination of excessive self-love and a lack of empathy toward others. He was so pretty. The top red line shows average scores for college students on the Narcissistic Personality Inventory, a common measure of narcissism from the years 1980 to 2008. The bottom blue line shows a percentage of first-person pronouns, for example, I, me, mine, in the lyrics of 10 most popular songs of the year from 1980 to 2007. As you can see, there has been a steady increase in both measures over time, suggesting that narcissism may be increasing in the United States. And in England, I guess, because some of our music comes from England. Our social self is made up of the roles we play. Each aspect of our lives requires different actions and thoughts. We may be a parent, we are a student, we may be have an extended family member for different individuals. And those are the roles that we play. Our social identity, each individual identifies themselves by their extended social roles. You're an American, you may be a church member, you may identify yourself by your ethnic group. Social comparisons. In order to understand where we are in the world, individuals must compare themselves to other people in the society. This not only includes abilities, but opinions as well. Success and failure, self-concept is strongly affected by whether we are successful in what we attempt. Other people's judgments, when our achievements are recognized, it builds our self-esteem. And of course, that is always important. We compare ourselves to others. I'm not going to talk about Trump again. Okay, anyway. We compare ourselves to others to gain information and to provide motivation. People who make you feel good about yourself are either less competent than you at something important to you, that's a social comparison, or more talented than you at something irrelevant to your self-concept, and that's a social reflection. Depending on where and how you are raised determines your view of yourself. People raised in the Western culture tend to be more individualistic than people raised in Eastern cultures. People from Eastern cultures tend to be more collectivistic. As confusing as it may seem, people can be individualistic in some aspects of their lives and collectivistic in others. This is Mortimer. Mort was adamantly conservative. This basically meant that he was economically individualistic, but morally he was a collectivist. His pencil-necked liberal neighbor was the very opposite. He was economically collectivistic, but morally individualistic. Self-efficacy is the sense that we are competent and effective in our lives. Research on self-efficacy and health shows that people who felt competent and effective in their lives are more persistent, less anxious, less depressed, more healthy, more academically successful. People who have self-efficacy tend to set more challenging goals, persist in the face of difficulty, predict productivity, keep calm and seek solutions when problems arise. Striving plus persistence equals accomplishment. With accomplishment, self-confidence grows. Self-efficacy grows with hard-won achievements. Research dealing with the self-efficacy of older adults found that when given positive images of being older, older adults in the West actually did better on memory tests than those who were given negative images. In Asia, where positive images prevail, memory decline is less acute. Feeling of competence is not the only factor of success. An individual must also feel that they have control over the outcome of their fate to be successful. Locus of control is the second factor in predicting success. Locus of control is the extent to which people perceive outcomes as internally controllable by their own efforts and actions, or as externally controlled by chance or outside forces. Now, this is really kind of interesting. You're leaving me.
Farmers market.
Okay. This is really kind of interesting because what we discovered from studying PTSD from the Vietnam War was the individuals that developed the worst PTSD were the ones who felt like they had no control. They were the lower ranking individuals. People that felt like they had control, their PTSD wasn't nearly as bad. So the individuals who were higher ranking NCOs or officers, they didn't develop PTSD at near the same rate as the draftees, the privates, the one stripers, the two stripers. They had a real problem. They had more of a problem anyway. So the more control you have, the less, the more you feel like you're in control, that you're in control of your destiny. So what I try to do with my students, I try to get the administration. I tried not to get the administration involved as much as possible. I try to solve all the problems as close to me as I possibly can, because once I get the administration involved, then they have to talk to 3 or 4 different people, and sometimes we can't get it takes forever to get the problem solved. But if I can solve the problem, that's the best solution. The closer it is to me doing the solving, the better it is for my students and the better it is for me. If I needed to ask my provost or my dean every question that comes up, then it would be a lot more difficult. Sometimes I just say, this is what I think you should do, and I'm going to approve that. Sometimes I get in trouble, and that's okay. I'm still working. I haven't been fired yet. As a matter of fact, I just signed a 2-year contract, so we'll see what happens. Studies with dogs back in the 70s by Seligman showed that when confronted with a persistent negative situation where the creature had no means of escape, the creature would remain paralyzed even when escape was possible. And this is the thing that they had. They created this box, and the dog could, in one side they had an electric pad, and in the other there was no electricity. But if they closed this door and they just kept shocking the dog, and then they opened it up, the dog wouldn't jump into the electric-free area. They were paralyzed. They were paralyzed because they didn't think it made any difference if they jumped into the other side. Researchers note that humans in depressed or oppressed situations often display the same attitude. Paralysis of will, passive resignation, motionless apathy. And this is known as learned helplessness, where they have been downtrodden so much for such a long period of time, they can't move. They are paralyzed. They are resigned to their fate. They are apathetic about what's going on. And we see this in humans as well. We see it in nursing homes. Well, I'm going to talk about that. Yeah, we're going to talk about that. Unfortunately, learned helplessness may come into play in real life circumstances. In an institutionalized setting where there is little choice for free will, learned helplessness may be the byproduct. If this occurs in a hospital or nursing home setting, the learned helplessness may affect the individual's health or chance for survival. Hospital patients who are trained to believe that they control stress require fewer pain relievers and sedatives and exhibit less anxiety. Now, of course, this is also going to happen any place where you feel like you can't leave, like in a prison situation. Hopefully you don't feel that way on the reservation. I hope you don't feel that way, that you can't leave. But that's a possibility as well. I have known people who lived in the same town all their lives and they hated it. They just hated that place and they couldn't say anything positive about it. But they didn't have enough money to leave, so they just stayed there. You can imagine that this could also happen with people living in a ghetto situation where they don't have enough money to leave, or they own property there and they just can't leave their property, or they can't sell it for one reason or another. So it's learned helplessness. I've seen this a lot traveling around the United States, people living in small towns that they can't get out of and feeling like they can't get out of that small town. So they cause trouble or they drink themselves to death. While having no choices is debilitating, having too many choices can be paralyzing. Research shows that people are more satisfied with choices when the number of choices are limited. So if you were thinking, I think I need something to drink, and you went in here, you might go, oh my goodness, there's too many choices. What will I get? A Mountain Dew, a Pepsi, a Dr. Pepper, maybe a Coke. How about a Sprite? No, wait a minute. I like Sunkissed Orange. Wait a minute. How about a Red Bull? This is Red Bull up here. I've lost my, wait a second. I lost my arrow. This is Red Bull right here. There you go. There's a Monster drinks. What is he going to get? Oh my goodness. This happens to my grandson. He wants to drink Gatorade. And he'll go in, and if there's like 5 or 6 different flavors, he can't decide. Does he want the blue one, the green one, the white one? Oh my goodness, or the red one? Research also shows that people are more satisfied with their choices when making a choice that is irreversible. The possibility of change gives the individuals the idea that there may be something better that they didn't try. And of course, this is what I've been trying to say to my former student. With 2 choices, what he needs to do is make a choice. He needs to choose one job over the other and not even think about it anymore. Thinking about, making a mistake. See that, and that's what kills him, is the idea that he made a mistake. And I told him, don't think that way. If you make it, this is a positive move. Anything that you do is positive. So why think this is more positive than the other? Just take the one that you want and not worry about it after that. Most people maintain a self-serving bias or the tendency to perceive themselves favorably. Such ideas allow individuals to interpret negative events as someone else's fault and positive events that may have happened through chance as due completely to their own positive attitudes. Failures are externally caused while successes are internally caused. In one study from Canada of young married couples, researchers discovered that males felt that they did more housework than their wives gave them credit for. However, at the same time, the wives took credit for more of the housework than they actually performed. Each group participated in self-serving bias, but unfortunately this self-serving bias caused marital discord. Self-serving bias is evident in academia as well. When students do well on an exam, not only was their hard work, their hard work that allowed them to do well, but the test was a true measure of the material. When students do poorly, it is usually because of the instructor. However, instructors are just as bad. Successes are due to their ability to teach, and failures due to the poor student, not the quality of the instruction. So, yeah. Most business people see themselves as more ethical than the average business person. 90% of business managers rate themselves superior to their average peer. High school students rate themselves as more honest, persistent, original, and reliable than the average student. Most drivers consider themselves above average drivers. Most people perceive themselves as more intelligent than their average peer, better looking, and much less prejudiced. Most adults believe that they support their aging parents more than do their siblings. Los Angeles residents view themselves as healthier than most of their neighbors, and most college students believe they will outlive their actuarially predicted death by about 10 years. So, when I was born, I've told you this story. When I was born, my life expectancy was 59, and of course, I'm 73 right now, so I'm way, way ahead of what I was supposed to have been in 1949. Now, the reason that life expectancy was so low at that point was because so many people smoked. And now that number of people in the United States that smoke has been cut about in half. So it was close to 50% when I was in 1949, right after World War II, and just before the Korean War. And right now, of course, it's closer to 25%. So that's one of the reasons why life expectancy has gone up so much. So my life expectancy, I'm about to hit it again. Right now, I think for men, it's in the 76, 77 range. No matter what statistics might say to the contrary, most people see their community and state and region as similar to that described by Garrison Keillor of Lake Wobegon. And this was a radio program that ended about 4 or 5 years ago. And this is what he would say about the people of Lake Wobegon. All the women are strong, all the men are good looking, and all the children are above average. And of course, that's what we want. Well, maybe not. Maybe we don't want all of our women to be strong. I grew up in a town like that. Wait a minute, that's where I grew up. Well, the men were a lot better looking than the women in my hometown. It was really kind of weird. Wait a minute. Oh, well, anyway. Most people practice some degree of unrealistic optimism, seeing the future as only holding good things. While unrealistic optimism may keep us going forward, sometimes it can get us in trouble. Many people see themselves as immune to misfortune and so do not prepare themselves for it. While everyone marries for eternity, half of all marriages in Western society end in divorce. People shun seatbelts, they deny the effects of smoking, they don't consistently use contraceptives, they swear that they can change an undesirable partner, which is pretty much impossible. People who are optimistic have a positive self-efficacy, better health, and more solid well-being than a pessimist. Optimism allows us to believe that happiness continues around the corner. However, a dash of realism, what Julie Norum calls defensive pessimism, can keep people's eyes open to the possibility of negatives. Smoking, driving while intoxicated, lack of contraception, poor seatbelt use. Don't make me laugh. It's cool to be gloomy. Yeah. During the Nixon administration, Richard Nixon would give speeches praising the silent majority. These were the conservatives in the country that backed his conservative policies as compared to the vocal minority that picketed Washington on a daily basis. And this was right at the end of the Vietnam War. Nixon became president in 1968. He broke into the Democratic headquarters. Well, he didn't do it, but he had people do it, and he got in trouble for it. That's the famous Watergate scandal. That was in 1971, 72. And then he left office in 1975, finally. Anyway, Nixon assumed that most people favored his ideas. This is false consensus effect. the tendency to overestimate the commonality of one's opinions and one's undesirable or unsuccessful behaviors. Tonight, to you, the great silent majority of my fellow Americans, I ask for your support. That's Richard Nixon. Yeah, anyway, and he won. He won both two elections. Of course, he had to leave in infamy at the just before the end of his second term. But he was the only president that resigned so far. Just as people tend to assume that everyone else has similar ideas to them, people also tend to overestimate their abilities to see their actions as unique. This is known as the false uniqueness effect. False consensus is an overestimation of others. False uniqueness is an underestimation of others. Individuality. Always remember that you are unique, just like everybody else. We practice cognitive conceit. We overestimate the accuracy of our beliefs and judgments and misremember our own past in self-enhancing ways. And of course, this is one of the problems with former President Donald Trump. He overestimates the accuracy of his own beliefs. He said this before he got elected president, that he knew more than the generals, and he could end the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, just like that, because he knew more than the generals did, and he would stop ISIS in its tracks. That's what he said. Well, he didn't end either of the wars, and he certainly didn't stop ISIS. It was the Kurds that stopped ISIS. Well, anyway, he was quite the braggart. He said some really silly things about COVID and kind of got us in trouble. He even went against the vaccine that he created, which was kind of silly. Cognitive conceit. If we cannot misremember an event, then we will probably try to justify it. And he did that as well. That's what he's doing with the indictment for having all those secret documents at his home, something he wasn't supposed to do. The more favorably we see ourselves in a select dimension, the more likely we are to use that dimension to judge others. Wait a minute, the joke is funny. Hello, God, my wife says I should stop acting as if I have a direct line to you. Funny. The more favorably we view ourselves, the more we think others perceive us in a flattering way. If a piece of information flatters us, then we believe it and we evaluate positively both the test and any evidence suggesting that the test is valid. We bask in reflected glory of someone we are acquainted to. If linked with a negative person, we soften our view of them. Okay. Research shows that when a person with high self-esteem faces failure, they tend to maintain their self-worth by perceiving others as failing and by exaggerating their superiority over others. While sibling rivalry is not universal, when brothers are close in age or sisters are close in age, people tend to compare them. If one is markedly more able than the other, there tends to be conflict. And this, of course, happened to me. My mom and dad had kids, one right after the other. My sister was born in 1948. In February 1948, I was born in October 1949, and then my next brother was born in July 1951. So we were all pretty close to each other. And my brother was born, I have an older brother, and I'm number two brother. He was born in 1947. September, no, that can't be right. He must have been born in 46. In September of 46. Then my sister was born in, that can't be right. She was born in 48. She was born in February 48. Okay. Anyway, yeah, so we're all kind of close to each other. My sister was a year ahead of me, and I was 2 years ahead of my brother. So, yeah, we got a lot of comparisons. Anyway, did it end in conflict? No, not really. When facing a romantic rival, an individual is more likely to feel jealousy if their rival's achievements are in the same general field of their own aspirations. Why are relationships so important to our self-esteem? Despite how individualistic we may think we are, social relationships are a gauge of social acceptance or rejection. Social acceptance is conducive to thriving and survival. Low self-esteem predicts an increased risk of depression, drug abuse, and some forms of delinquency. Research shows that when faced with failure, people with high self-esteem are more likely to react with aggression. Roy Baumeister has done a great deal of work with self-esteem and finds that people with high self-esteem are more likely to be obnoxious, to interrupt other people, and talk at people rather than to people. By making excuses for ourselves, it helps to protect us from depression. While depressed people may make more accurate appraisals of themselves, the negative thinking tends to mire them deeper in depression. Better to be deluded than sad. That's a thought. Research shows that maintaining a high self-esteem, even when there is evidence to the contrary, reduces an individual's anxiety, even in the face of continuing threats. So the bottom line is like yourself. Please like yourself. Most university sorority members perceive those in their sorority as far less likely to be conceited and snobby than those in other sororities. And of course, you guys don't have sororities. But anyway, 2/3 of Americans feel that their child's public school is good, while seeing the nation's public schools as unable to teach, as little sense as that makes. Most executives overpredict their firm's ability to produce. Such self-serving bias can lead an individual to gamble away their paycheck, having faith in their own good fortune. Such self-serving bias will permit an individual to open a doomed business without proper background capital. Such self-serving bias possibly took the United States into Vietnam, the Soviets into Afghanistan, and even U.S. forces into Iraq. Self-serving bias. Anyway. I had a friend that was sure he was going to win the Reader's Digest, what is it? The Reader's Digest used to give $1 million away every year, and he was just sure he was going to win it because he got this letter in the mail. Everybody got the same letter. But he got this letter, and he was just sure he was going to win that $1 million. So he went out and he spent a bunch of money on credit because he knew he was going to win the lottery or whatever it is. Of course, he didn't win. And then he had to pay everything back. And he had, 3 kids, and it was a mess. It was such a mess. He was always borrowing money. Couldn't eat lunch because he didn't have any money. It was sad. Self-presentation is the person that we present to others. False modesty is the facade that people may present when they feel superior to someone else. This may take the form of insulting yourself, fishing for reassurance or praise. It also may be used to keep others from becoming envious or resentful. I used to be vain and proud, but now I'm so humble. I must be a saint, at least. Sometimes people sabotage their chances for success by creating impediments that make success less likely. This self-handicapping serves to protect the individual from dealing with failure. The failure is due to their own handicap, not their lack of ability. Just as people attribute their failures on external causes, they themselves may choose to place impediment as a form of self-protection. And my son did this. He was ranked number 1 in the state in the 800, and he was ranked number 3 in the 400. This was when he was in high school, of course. And the week before the state finals, before the state meet, he kept finding excuses not to go to practice. My leg's sore. I'm tired today. He just kept finding excuses, and he didn't win either race. As a matter of fact, he came in fifth in the 400, and he came in second in the 800. You know, self-handicapping. Why did he do it? Examples of self-handicapping: reducing preparation for important individual athletic events. That's what my son did. Giving one's opponent an advantage. Report feeling depressed. Perform poorly at the beginning of a task in order not to create unreachable expectations. Not try as hard as they could during a tough ego-involving task. Impression management. Self-presentation often happens without conscious effort, especially with someone new or with members of the opposite sex. We tend to put our best foot forward and attempt to make an impression on them. Self-monitoring, being attuned to the way one presents oneself in social situations and adjusting one's performance to create the desired impression. Some people are high self-monitors while others are low self-monitors. Some people will readily adjust their behavior to their circumstance and the individuals that they are around. Some social settings dictate that the individual adjusts their behavior to fit the social setting. One problem with people who are high self-monitors: they may espouse one idea in one circumstance and the opposite in another. High self-monitors are social chameleons. Self-monitoring is the tendency to use cues from other people's self-presentation in controlling our own self-presentations. High self-monitors are skilled impression managers. In other words, they're malleable. And this is what a chameleon actually looks like. They're the ones that change color as they go from one place to another so that they are camouflage. And there's my grandson. This is in Florida. There he is. He's got his mom's phone in his hand and he's playing on her computer, or not. And there he is with his mom. And that's it. Okay, well, I'll talk to you guys next week. I don't know what we're talking about next week. Let me take a quick look. The need to justify our action, the benefits of dissonance reduction. So, where it's kind of the same topic. So I'll see you guys next week.